All right, I think people are joining us. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Okay, I think I'll get started. It's a little after 4:30, and this is Conserving Holy Cross Art Collections. My name is Meredith Fluke, and I'm the director of the Iris and B. Gerald Cantor Art Gallery. I'm really happy to see people here today. This is a really important program for us. I'm joined here by my colleagues Sue Jackson and Theresa Carmichael and Geraldine Brooks, her associate, who are conservators who've worked with us on conserving some of our art collections. Today's program is held in conjunction with Mirror to the World, 2 Centuries of Collecting at Holy Cross, which is now on view at the Cantor Art Gallery through February 20th. I'm just going to say a quick note on format. I'm going to present, Theresa and Geraldine are going to present, Sue is going to present. You're welcome to enter questions into the chat at any time. We'll try to pause between presenters and offer people an opportunity to ask questions. If you could keep them to the chat while we're speaking for that 45 minutes, and then at the end, it can be more informal. You can raise your hands and we can have sort of a more chattier chat at the end of the presentations. So the exhibition, Mirror to the World, comprises 46 works of art that are held in collections across the Holy Cross campus. It represents 2 years of work on this part of the staff of the Cantor, and it was enabled by the opening of the programming space that was created by the pandemic. It was completed in part to prepare for the move of the Cantor to the new Prior Performing Arts Center. I just want to say a couple of words of thanks before we get started today. I've been really fortunate to have a number of partners on campus and also in the art world that have been helping me think through various pieces of strategy of conservation, resource building, display, and the list is long, so I'll just mention a couple on campus. This includes my colleagues at the Cantor, Paula Rosenblum, Tim Johnson, and Frank Gregory. On campus, the head of archives, Abby Stambach, director of library services, Mark Shelton, Dean Anne-Marie Leshkovich, and also Provost Margaret Friege have been helpful in providing support. And I also want to say there's a number of faculty who've contributed a lot of knowledge to our collections, including Virginia Regan and Amy Adams and Susan Rogers, Jim Waylu. So I just want to say a quick thanks to them. And I also want to say there are a lot of off-campus partners who have been helping with sort of the concept of this show, but also weighing in on a lot of the attributions. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about today. In that it reflects the work that we have done, this exhibition endeavors to outline the history of collections housed on campus and to highlight some of the strengths and some of the challenges that characterize them. The exhibition, as we conceived it, is really meant to interrogate the purpose and value of a college art collection, and in particular, a Holy Cross College art collection, to help us prepare for future opportunities, whether they be exhibitions, programming, more integration into the academic program, or collection building. And it's really meant to provide a benchmark for the work that we have done and the work that needs to be done in terms of maintaining a high standard of both care and collecting here. This program is really meant to address specifically issues of collections stewardship. And this is something that we highlight in the exhibition. It's in the wall text, and I just put the sort of text of the wall here in the PowerPoint as well. One of the big fundamental principles of collecting is that the institution that holds the works of art believes it to be cultural heritage. And we try to think about an art collection not as something that we own, but as something that we steward and we hold in public trust. We are the current stewards of this material, and we're hopeful that it outlives us and that it continues to serve the greater community until the end of time. That's the idea, right? In order to keep these collections available, it's really important that we keep them from falling apart. So, like other things, this is something we've been talking a lot about with students. Artwork is always in a state of degradation. And we can only try our best to mitigate some of the environmental effects that can lead to this degradation. So temperature and humidity fluctuations, these are things that the conservators will talk to us about today. Unfortunately, at Holy Cross, a number of artworks have not been housed in stable environmental situations. And that's something that became sort of apparent to me as I was starting to think about collections here at Holy Cross. A lot of this is because there hasn't been any specific eyes on them. There's been no sort of person who has been tasked with paying attention to artworks here on campus, and especially artworks that are not part of the Cantor collection. So to be clear, we have 2,500 works in the Cantor collection, but then we have a lot of art collections on campus that fall outside of the Cantor acquisitioned object list. And those are the ones that we're talking more about today, things that have hung in public spaces, were given to the college, end up in storage spaces as part of a remodeling campaign, and are left there for long periods of time. And many of them, I would say decades of time, have they spent their lives in basements. So in 2019, when I first arrived at Holy Cross, we did a bit of a survey of storage. We recognized that collections work was something that we needed to do, especially in preparation for our move into the new Prior Performing Arts Center. We then had a pandemic hit, and so we utilized that time to do some specific collections inventory, and then turned our eyes to the part of the collection that we didn't know enough or much about, that really hadn't ever had an inventory done on it. So we started thinking about what you're looking at here, this storage space, and what do we do with the works of art in it. We were, because we had this space in our program, we opened up the gallery walls and we did sort of a lab in the fall of 2020 when we didn't have students on campus. And we basically brought paintings, about 25 paintings, out of storage spaces and hung them on the walls of the gallery, mostly because we wanted to see what they looked like when you got them out of the basement, and fluorescent lighting, and when you put them on the wall and sort of treated them like art. Did you change your mind about what you wanted to do with these artworks? It was at that time that we called Theresa Carmichael to come and do a survey and to look at these works with us, and to create some, to help us think through a priority list, to look at the works and let us know, what works would benefit from a little conservation work, what works would benefit from a lot of conservation work, what works were in desperate need of conservation work. So Theresa helped a lot in helping us create a priority list that will continue to serve us in the future. I'm just going to say here, quickly, we do not have a conservation budget here at Holy Cross. We don't have a collections care budget. And so I peeled away some programming budget because we had some space in the program during the pandemic year. And so we decided that we could conserve 5 paintings. And so we chose 5 paintings, based on Theresa's recommendations. So we have more to conserve, but these are the 5 that I thought would be a sort of a representative sample of the kinds of work that we could do. My thought in choosing these 5, and I'm going to just talk through why I chose each of them, is that they were the most impactful and instructional choices amongst the 25 works that could really get us perhaps to a next step. So the first that we chose is this painting by Jean-Joseph Benjamin Constant. It's one of the few works that we have in our sort of non-Cantor collection that actually has a provenance to it. Actually, this is in the Cantor collection. It was given by the Cantor family, and it hung for a while in Father Brooks's office. It is also signed by the artist Benjamin Constant, who is a relatively well-known artist, 19th century French. He did a lot of scenes of sort of bazaars and harems. He was sort of what we would call an Orientalist painter. He lived for a time in Morocco and became interested in the Orientalist genre of painting. This is a work that we have done some research on. Virginia Regan, who is a faculty emerita in the art history department, wrote a blog on this painting that you can read about in our collections blog, Treasures of the Mount, just a little plug for our collections blog. And this is one of the places where we've sort of been depositing some of the information that we've been gathering about these works. So we have thought about this painting. It's before picture, and to be clear, I'm showing you only before pictures because I don't want to steal Theresa's thunder. And I also want to sort of walk you through the process a little bit. This before picture, you can see it's a very nuanced painting. It has a lot of, it's all in grayscale. It suggests that it's quite beautiful, but it had a layer of varnish and grime on the surface that we thought, if we cleaned that away, if we did something, would we be able to get sort of deeper into this painting and understand it better? Just a note about Benjamin Constant, one of the things I love about him is, he's famous for these harem scenes. Here's an example of this odalisque that's in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I love the fact that he kind of translated the odalisque straight into the entombment by switching out the subject matter. So we know that he did do some religious paintings, but that's not what he's primarily known for. The second painting that we decided to conserve is this small landscape. And you can see, from the information I've given you, we do not know the artist, we do not know the date. We do not know how it got to Holy Cross. Its surface suggested that it was a bit messy. We didn't really know what we were looking at. And so the thought process here for me was, if Theresa, in Theresa's capable hands, could something happen to this painting that could teach us more about who made it, when it was made, where it was made. I don't think she could figure out who gave it to us, but she's a magician, so who knows, right? So the idea is, this is a big question mark, and can some intervention help us to understand this painting better? The next painting that we chose for conservation is this small oil on copper that has lived its life in archives. I think it was for a time on the wall in Dinan Library, and then it made its way into the archives. We don't know a ton about it, except it has a sort of frame, that on the frame is a plaque that says Elisabetta Sirani. I will also add, there's a lot of eye work that goes into this, and my eyes are telling me that this is a really beautiful little painting. So just in its beauty, and then also in the fact that it had this attribution on the frame of Elizabeth Sirani, who is a 17th century artist, one of the very few female early modern painters that we know much about. There's a lot of work that's being done on Elizabeth Sirani right now. And so I wondered if we could learn more about this painting, could we contribute to what we know about Elizabeth Sirani? Wouldn't it be amazing if we had a painting by Elizabeth Sirani? But it was hard to know because of the surface condition of it. If we really had it, we can't access the paint strokes, we can't really access the palette. And so we have to do conservation to see if we can get at that attribution. And just so I can say this, Elizabeth Sirani on a frame is not the same as a signature by Elizabeth Sirani, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's by Elizabeth Sirani anyway. So if we are to get at any sort of questions of attribution, we need to have this painting in better condition. And I think Theresa and I determined that it had some vulnerabilities, there was some flaking. It was a painting that probably needed to get work done on it if we wanted it to remain in any condition at all. It was definitely, it felt like a little bit vulnerable. And this is just an example of a painting by Elizabeth Serrani that is definitely attributed to her. That's in a collection in Bologna, which is where she was from. And this is just to illustrate that, you know, you really need to get to the surface of the painting to say, you know, do these paintings look alike? Well, how will I know if my painting is dirty or the varnish is yellow, if I have the same kind of luminescence that this painting from Bologna has? The fourth painting that we decided to conserve is this half length of a woman. The label on it said, you know, painting of a bare-breasted woman. In looking at it, determined that it was Mary Magdalene, based on the small oil jar that you see behind her. And then Mary Magdalene is often shown with loose sort of golden locks. In addition, there are paintings like this that you can find in lots of collections by a very prolific artist named Guido Reni, 17th century, another Bolognese painter. So this has a Reni-esque quality to it that my eyes are telling me, but then again, this is a painting that, you know, as you can see the surface, very hard to get at the actual painting with all of the yellow on the surface. So this is very representative of the kinds of artworks that we have at Holy Cross, these saint half lengths. And so this was, you know, could we get to this painting? Is it beautiful underneath these layers? Can we figure out if it's, you know, a 17th century painting, a copy of a 17th century painting? And those are the questions that we would hope, you know, we can start to get to once we have done some conservation work on it. And this is just a comparison of a you know, known Guido Reni Mary Magdalene painting. So you can see why I thought, well, it's like a Guido Reni, but how is it related to this Reni school is the question that we'd like to answer with this painting. And then our final painting is this large, what we were calling boy exiting boat. I think I followed it through some an inventory on campus as the baptism. It's clearly not a baptism. You can see that some of the confusion around the iconography here comes from the fact that the painting's, you know, in pretty rough shape. There are tears across, you know, through the canvas, and lots of issues which Theresa will tell us all about. It's an interesting painting because of the scale. I was, you know, thinking about like these big figures, and then it's also signed on the back, which is special and helpful by an artist named Giovanni Lega, who told us that he painted it in Florence. We knew Giovanni Lega is a 19th century painter, so we can start to understand this painting already with that signature. But we need to get to the painting and get it fixed and have it in a state where we can actually read what's going on there. It's hard to tell what's happening in the background. It was very difficult to tell if that was a boat or what. So, you know, cleaning and repair was really important here. We are also very intrigued by this magnificent frame, which is what Sue is going to talk to us about. It's very striking. This picture does it no justice. It's a really amazing frame that we knew if we were going to conserve the painting, we definitely would have to conserve the frame as well, because it had, you know, enough damage that it you know, the two would be not matching anymore if you conserved one or the other. And I think, you know, knowing when a frame is made, is the frame original to the painting? These are all questions that we would like to ask a work of art like this. So these are the 5 paintings. This is my setup for Theresa, who's going to tell us what she did with them. Does anyone have any sort of initial questions before, as I stop screen sharing and hand the screen share over to Theresa?
Hi, I want to first of all thank you very much for the pleasure of being here with you today. I will actually talk to you about 3 of the paintings, and then my colleague Geraldine Brooks will talk to you about Mary Magdalene and the youth emerging from the boat, which is the name that we thought it was called. Anyway, so there's just, again, the names of the paintings. Meredith already talked about the provenance as best we know. So we're going to start with the Holy Family. This is a very interesting treatment, conservation treatment, for several reasons. We don't often get works of art on copper panel. It's a beautiful surface for artists to work on, this beautifully rendered image. At some point in this painting's history, it's been lined or secured to a wooden panel. So there is behind the copper panel a piece of wood that it's been glued to. The reason that we don't always find works of art on copper is because there is a different expansion coefficient between the paint and the copper, as opposed to works of art on canvas. So what happens is when the copper expands, as it does on a very small scale, the paint does not. The paint is inert, and so you get a bit of flaking, which is very common with works of art on copper. So that was a problem that this painting had. But when we look at paintings, we break them down into the structure. So the secondary support in this case is the copper panel rather than a stretcher. And then it we'll go to the ground layer. So this ground layer is very thinly applied, and the paint layer is oil, which is pretty normal for a painting of this period. So beyond that, we have a surface coating. In this case, it's a natural resin varnish. And then on top of that, there's a layer of surface grime. So first, when we look at the painting like this, we have to stabilize the surface before any cleaning can be done. So that was done in this case. It's very interesting that we, on works of art on metal like this, we have to use completely different materials than we would if we were conserving a work on canvas. But so first we stabilize the front. We use a heated spatula, and we used adhesive that's specific for metal so that it won't be corrosive, because often these copper panels have little pits. They have not only the flaking, but little pits or corrosion underneath the paint layer. So you'll notice that the surface isn't completely pristinely flat. But once we remove the surface grime, then we remove the varnish. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not advancing, am I? This is the painting in a raking light, and it was stable, except for the flaking in the paint layer. The panel itself didn't have any structural problems, but there you can see the area of flaking and the skirt, Mary's skirt. And there was a label on the back, so we always document that. And this is a picture before, just a detail of the figures. They're very well rendered. It's a beautiful little painting. There's considerable amount of overpaint. So this painting had been treated at least once or twice in the past, and the overpaint was predominantly oil paint. Now the philosophy of conservation is that everything's reversible, but that wasn't always the case. So oftentimes we get pictures that had been treated and been in-painted with oil paint in the past, which becomes very close in solubility to that of the original paint. So it's sometimes very difficult to remove. So this is half clean. So the line in the very center shows that not only surface grime, so just surface grime was removed from that very, very thin vertical line. And then the rest of it has the varnish removed also. So you can see on the far edges, both the surface dirt and the varnish has been removed. So you can see after removing the varnish, you can see all of the areas of old in-painting and the areas that have been flaking in the past. There are a lot of old fills, some of which were stable, some of which were not. Where they remained stable, they were left. These are just some details during cleaning. So you can see up at the top, you have some very dark old fills. And below that, to the adjacent to Mary's head, there's a lot of pitting that had been in-painted without being filled, but it is there. And then on the left side of the picture. So you can see the flesh tones have changed considerably upon cleaning. So the skirt here, what the drapery was all a mess. There was so much in painting and filling, and most of it was not very well done. But once that was removed, we didn't have that incrustation that it appeared to have when we first started. So this is with all of the losses filled. When they're too shallow, they couldn't be filled, but for the most part, they're filled in this case because, again, the materials that we were using on the copper panel, it needed to be filled with an epoxy putty, which is very difficult to work with in any case, but all the losses were filled, and then we commenced to paint the losses. So you can see it's quite extensive, and then this is after treatment. So here you can see the before and after treatment together. And if you look in the skirt of Mary, again, you see on the left all the incrustation of the old in painting and fills. And next we're going to go to the Entombment of Christ that Meredith was telling you about. So here's the painting before treatment, and you can see it's very yellowed. A natural resin varnish tends to get very yellowed when it oxidizes over the years. A mastic varnish will discolor in 15 to 20 years, and a Damar in 25 to 30. Sorry, reverse that. In any case, so this shows that the canvas was quite slack on the stretcher. You've got a stretcher bar impression in the middle where the canvas has been leaning onto a vertical stretcher member. There were also a couple of small tears in the upper right corner that you can see. And this is the back of the stretcher. The wooden pegs in the corners allow us to expand the canvas, expand the stretcher, which tightens the canvas. And those were all present in this case. This is a detail of an old tear that was stable. It was pretty well done, and that is to the left of Christ's head. It was about 2 inches long, and it had old oil overpaint. Excuse me. So this is half cleaned. Excuse me. After the surface dirt and varnish were removed. And then this is after treatment. So you can see before and after how disfiguring the yellow varnish was in this case. And the next picture we're going to talk about was a very interesting treatment for several reasons. Though it was said to be, oh, I don't know, although I won't talk about the provenance, I guess. It didn't really appear to be terribly Dutch to me, but in any case, when you looked at the surface, my main concern with this painting was the flaking. It wasn't stable, it wasn't exhibitable, but you really don't want parts of the original paint to disappear. But as we delved into it, we found several things. So this is on a makeshift stretcher that's not really designed for these wooden keys. But someone stuck them in the corners in hopes that they could expand the canvas, which they couldn't really do. But this is the painting half clean. The surface grime has been removed and the varnish has been removed. And I'll tell you what you see. I'm so sorry. Well, before we started cleaning it, we have to stabilize the paint layer as we described in the last treatment. We need to use an adhesive and a heated spatula and secure the areas that are flaking. But once we removed the grime and the varnish layers, it became apparent that the areas that were severely flaking were previously filled and in painting, and it was these old fills that were actually popping rather than the original paint, and that's always good news. The problem was, sorry, I think I went the wrong way. So this was after cleaning, and you can see all of the old losses. You could also see at this point that there were at least 2 camps of previous painting in the past. One of them was more soluble than the other, but a lot of the painting was done with oil that was apparently very old. It was very close in solubility to that of the original. So once we went a little bit further trying to remove these fills that clearly weren't stable over time, we didn't want to line the painting, take off the old lining. It had been lined, which means an additional piece of fabric has been adhered to the back. And clearly that wasn't really holding it completely together. But we didn't want to remove that and replace that and then have down the road have some of these old fills popping further. So we decided to remove them. So in doing so, here you can see some of the old painting. So in doing so, we found that in some cases there was the original fabric underneath. You can see in the middle that the fabric is very, very open. I don't know if I could make this any bigger. It's sort of gauze-like. It doesn't have much body to it. It was very, very embrittled. And in a lot of cases, it wasn't there. And so a lot of places that were flaking didn't actually have any canvas behind them other than the lining fabric. So you can see in the upper left corner, those gray areas are places that we put insets into the painting itself. So where there was no canvas, we replaced the missing canvas with areas of the same shape, dimension of a similar canvas. In the case of the top left and in the lower sort of just left of center, you can see that there is some priming involved here, but in other areas there is not. So then they were refilled. So this is with the losses again filled. And then we lined it using a stable acrylic fabric. We used a vacuum hot table to heat seal the painting onto its new canvas support. So the first one was removed, all the adhesive had to be removed, and then we put it onto new fabric support and then got a new stretcher for it because that stretcher, well, it wasn't a stretcher, it was a strainer, but it wasn't adequate to support the painting and be able to be expanded as needed. So this is after treatment. There you see there are a couple of figures in the center. There are a couple of figures to the far left there. So this is before and after. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Geraldine Brooks, who has worked with me for the last 31 years, God bless her. And she took care of the treatment on Mary Magdalene and the Lega, the youth emerging from the boat. So I'm going to step out and let her take over. Where's the down button?
Okay. Hello, everybody. So I will talk about Mary Magdalene. So she is painted onto canvas and stretched over our stretcher. She was quite cupped. Her surface, the paint layer was very cupped. The stretcher, I mean the canvas had shrunk. And when the paint is on a surface that is shrinking, clearly there's no place to go but up. So the paint was just cupping everywhere and raised. The problem with that is, unfortunately, you get flaking paint at some point. You can lose paint. So you can see in the raking light, particularly in the background under her hand, that is quite raised. She was lined, but the lining was very stable. So we decided to leave it on her lining and not take her off, which sometimes we do if we need to. So first of all, we removed the varnish, which was quite discolored and very patchy. You can see in her face, it's quite dark, even darker than the rest. The paint was pretty thick. And throughout, this is again raking. This is the reverse, so this is the stretcher, all the keys were there. You can actually see an outline of the painting, which is interesting because that's showing through the lining fabric as well. So this is the partially clean. As I was cleaning it, a lot of the paint was clearly overpaint. The way we could see that is, first of all, the color was quite different in some areas. and it was much thicker. So it was an oil paint that was applied on the surface. Some areas we were able to remove it with just a simple solvent that actually removes the varnish, and other areas was a lot harder. So a much stronger solvent was used for most of the overpaint, but at some areas, actually, it was decided that we couldn't remove the overpaint without harming the original, so it was left. So you can see on the half, some of her chest is still quite patchy with some overpaint. On her sleeve, you can see it's a little more orangey on the right side, and that's actually overpaint that's not matching the original. This is a partial. Again, you can see there were large areas, the tears on the back and on the background. Her hand, her chest had large patches as well. There were fills. So this is the overall after cleaning. After this picture, it actually was cleaned further. You can see in the lower left, she has what looks like a book. It's a little messy, it's very green. And we kept on cleaning it because it was decided it was overpaint for sure. So you'll see at the final picture that it actually is the rock that was all original underneath, that for some reason was covered. Somebody didn't like it, so they made it into a book. So again, this is a detail with the tears, the losses. Some had to be filled. There was a lot of pentimenti. On the left side of her face, you can see raised areas, lines through it, where the artist probably changed the composition at some point or painted over another painting. It's hard to tell sometimes. In this case, it was hard to tell as well. And this is a detail. So she had lost a lot of her glazes. She clearly had been over cleaned in the past and no longer had some of the glazes for the shadows and in the folds. You can see it was quite a mess. There's fills, there's still some of the overpaint that's more orangey under her finger in the center. And this is a final. So you can see in the final, it's actually a rock now underneath her arm. You can clearly see there's a cross. Also, the background had been quite overpainted. So it still has a texture that's not quite as even as we like it, just because the paint is still somewhat cupped. It was consolidated. It was all secured, but there's so much we could do with the cracks. The halo as well had been painted. We actually decided to leave it, but it is not original. It's not clear whether it had been overcleaned in the past and just put back, or if it never existed. But we were okay removing the book, but the halo, we were a little reluctant, so we left it. It is very subtle. Again, detail after treatment. And you can see now next to each other how much clearer she was. Now we're looking at a group of youth emerging from a boat. This one was very interesting for all kinds of reasons, but it actually didn't show any signs of having been touched in the past. So it was quite discolored. Unfortunately, there were some large tears. There's one that's about 2 by 3 on the upper left. This is one that's about 13 inches by 7 inches along the building on the upper part above the figure. There's also tons of buckles. This is the raking light, and some really severe cracking of the surface. Again, in this case, the canvas had shrunk and the paint just cracked and raised. They had no place to go. You can see the light through the tears. This is a detail in the upper right here. And you can see the cracking, it's quite severe. In some cases, it wasn't just cracked, it was really making a ridge of paint that just had no place to go, even when it was resecured. This is a detail. Again, a detail. A lot of detail in that one. So the surface had to be secured first. All the cracks were consolidated. You can see in that figure on the left, the really high ridges of the paint that had no place to go once the canvas shrunk. Again, here. This is a detail as it's being cleaned. So actually, the paint is consolidated, it's secure right now. You still have the ridge. The upper part of the fabric is much wider than the lower part, and that's where the cracks had to actually be cleaned separately, with a cotton tip very thinly, and really getting the varnish and the soot off the surface there. So it's still on those cracks in the lower part and not on the top. Again, here you can see how dark those cracks are, with the dirt is just embedded in those cracks. This is just a reverse. The canvas, you can see the signature on the back, actually, on the upper right. This is as it's being cleaned. You can see it's dramatic. It was very rewarding cleaning. This is a detail. So there was a thick layer of soot and a very discolored varnish layer, but there was no overpaint. It had not been touched otherwise. There was no painting to remove, which is quite unusual for a painting of that age. Those cracks are now, so after the painting was cleaned and consolidated, it had to go on the hot table for numerous flattening with moisture treatments to really relax the cracks as much as possible, and particularly the tear. After that was done, and we had the tear as flat as we hoped, we ended up I mended the tear and added some fibers in the back for strength. So little very thin fibers were added to the back of the mended tears. And then the painting was lined onto a new piece of fabric. This is just a detail. We were able to reuse the same stretcher. It was appropriate for the brief lining. This is before and painting. So you can see the details after the cleaning. Those cracks are still, unfortunately, were quite dark. Some had to be filled. And a lot of the glazes, again, when you look at this, the neck of the figure, the glazes are gone. This is the detail of a tear. And just the hand. So this is the final treatment. The light on those figures is absolutely amazing. So each crack had to be painted with a very fine brush. And this is, the one on the left is raking, but this is before and after. So it was a beautiful painting to work on, this one. And that's it. I'll put it back on that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Geraldine and Theresa. There have been a lot of questions, but I think I'll just save everything to the end and have Sue go first. And then I think, there's some in the weeds questions, there's some bigger sort of conceptual questions, and we'll just go at it all together at the end of the presentation, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, so Theresa has to stop sharing.
Okay.
See you, Theresa. All right, and now Sue, it's all yours. Perfect. And Sue, you have to unmute yourself.
There.
Yeah.
Hello. Those
Great,
details.
perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. It's great to be able to talk about the work we did on the frame for this painting. These are the photos that Meredith sent me when she inquired about having the frame treated. And the frame is immediately identifiable as an Italian frame in the Florentine style. I was pleased when I looked at it to see it had two really good things going for it. The ornament was almost completely intact, and the gilding seemed in very good condition. And you can tell some things from photos, but you really need to see an object in person to make an accurate evaluation for treatment. So I arranged to go with Meredith to go take a look. And in looking at the frame, one of the main issues was that there was some structural damage in the bottom corner. You expect to see a separation in the miter, but anywhere else there's a crack. You have to be suspicious and check it for movement. And if it's moving, you need to stabilize it. Here you see cracks in the midsection on either side of the miter. There are also cracks towards the inside edge and up along the cove on the side. There were cracks. There were brackets on the back at all four corners, these big ones, and then the small one. Brackets can be good or not so good. They can hold things in place or out of place. Here you can see white gesso where the frame was worn along the bottom. And gesso is the layer that is put on the wood. This is a carved, this is all, the ornament is all carved. Gesso is the layer that fills the grain of the wood and provides a base for gilding. And also you can see here that there's a piece of the corner that's lost, and there's a nail there that probably pushed the piece off. The frame has pierced carving, and the thin points on both sides of the frame at the top and bottom of the shells were vulnerable. Glue blocks were added to these places at some time in the past, but two of them had breaks. Here are the blocks on the sides, and this is where the break is, and also had some gesso loss, and this is the biscuit on the back, and you can see the cracking. Another major problem area was this top corner. At one point, there must have been a leak where this was hanging because there is an area of deterioration typical of water damage. Gesso is a water-based material, and water undermines the glue in the gesso. Bronze powder paint was added at some point to try and cover up the white, but it continued to deteriorate. There's also a piece of ornament missing here, and there's a small bit that was saved that goes right here, and we were able to reattach that. This is the opposite corner going down the side of the frame, and you can see it has more gesso losses here, here, and here. And this is the center shell ornament on the other side of the frame. You can see there's another split in this thin area, more gesso losses, and here, 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 and on this outside edge. And there's also some wear to the gilding here. where you can see the white gesso below and some of the gray bowl, which is the layer between the gesso and the gilding. This is often called the maid's mark because it often happens when an area has been wiped too many times. And this is the other bottom corner where you have more gesso losses, and you have lifting gesso where you see the cracks. It really happened along here and here. This side we actually consolidated the day that I was looking at the frame. And these areas, if you touched them and tried to transport the frame, you could, they might pop off. They're very vulnerable. So given the size and the fragile condition of the frame, it made sense to treat it on site instead of trying to move it to the studio. I figured with the help of one other trained conservator, we could accomplish the work in 3 days. Treating it on site would save time, and we could easily complete the work for the planned exhibition in January. Happening now. Let me see. So the plan was to stabilize the structure, consolidate the lifting gesso, reattach saved pieces of ornament, clean the surface, remove any dark in-painting, fill the larger gesso losses, gold leaf the fills to match, and then in-paint the smaller losses and distracting areas. And due to time constraints, what we would not be doing is replace any of the missing ornament, and this could be done at a later time. We started with the structural work. You can see all the clamps. We used a Lee Valley fish glue as the adhesive. In the bottom corner, we pulled the nail at the tip to be able to fit the piece back on. And the close fitting tip, the two sides of wood, was also holding the larger breaks apart. So we sanded inside the miter on one side of the wood. This gave more room and allowed the larger breaks to come together. It was also helpful to be able to feed glue into the back of the frame. In one spot, we added a bit of carvable epoxy after isolating the area with fish glue. This bridged the gap in the wood. And made it stable. And it was enough to keep it stable, but it was also with the concept of reversibility in materials and conservation. It was also not so big, and if somebody decided that it should be removed in the future, it could be more easily removed. And we did remove the small bracket that was at the tip because it wasn't really serving any useful purpose. We consolidated the gesso wherever it was loose on the frame, and we used a brush to apply it. It was consolidated with Lasco medium for consolidation, a liquid acrylic dispersion material, which penetrates and softens the gesso and allows it to relax into place while also acting as an adhesive. In this photo, a student, Julia, is doing some of the consolidation on the day that I initially looked at the frame. It's can be a nice meditative process. If you look closely below the orange arrow, you can see a thin, dark line. That line is the original gilding layer. From this evidence, we can see that a second layer of gesso was applied and then the current gilding. When this was discovered, it was an aha moment as to why the gilding was in such good condition. And the green arrows pointing to a spot of Pfluger, the acrylic fill material we used as an alternate gesso to fill the larger areas of loss. This was applied to the whole area of loss and then sanded smooth with successive grits of finer sandpaper, starting with 240, then 320 and 400. The fills have to be very smooth and transition well into the surrounding area. Every detail shows up on a gilded surface. You can also see that the frame is dusty. There was a thicker layer of dust in the recesses of the frame where dust would fall naturally. The frame was cleaned with a vacuum and brush after consolidation, and then wiped with alcohol on a cotton ball. This is a close-up of the top damaged corner of the frame. The bronze powder touch-up paint was removed with acetone. The gesso consolidated and then filled with the Pfluger, the acrylic fill material, and sanded smooth. And you can see here the edge of the gray bowl that is that layer between the gesso and the gilding. There were about 57 areas of loss filled, and most of them in this top corner. And here are some of the other areas of fill. The next step was to gild. Gold is a noble metal, which means it is non-corrosive. It's also the most malleable metal there is, which allows it to be made into leaf. Gold leaf is 1/250,000th of an inch thick, or it takes 1,000 leaves to equal the thickness of a dime. It's alloyed with silver and copper to make different carats of gold, and pure gold is 24 carats. And there are two types of traditional gilding, oil gilding and water gilding. And the leg of frame was water gilt and had those burnished highlights, which you can only do with water gilding. Unfortunately, we did not get any photos of gilding the frame. We were working flat out to get finished by the end of the third day. In water gilding, but here's some sample photos for water gilding. In water gilding, there's a layer of clay mixed with rabbit skin glue that is applied to the gesso with a brush, and it is called bowl, and it comes in different colors. It can be yellow, red, gray. The gold leaf adheres to the surface when the water is applied, reactivating the glue in the bowl. Gold leaf is cut with a special gilder's knife and picked up with a brush called the gilder's tip, made of squirrel hair. We used acrylic paint as an alternate bowl on the lega frame and added alcohol to the water to make the gold adhere to the surface. The new gilding was then burnished to a high shine with an agate burnisher. The gilding was toned to blend with the surrounding area. And also on the gold, it usually goes down in a square or has a hard edge. So you need to feather the edge of the gold to make it blend in. And then the smaller losses were inpainted with acrylic paint, like this area here would be inpainted. We put the frame up to see how it looked and made final adjustments to the surface. You can see an acrylic paint palette down here. So the paint really hasn't been mixed up to do any in painting yet. And this is Wenda Kochanowski that worked with me all 3 days on the frame. We worked together for many years, and she was invaluable to have on the project. Here are some before and after shots, detail shots. And the final result. We accomplished a lot in 3 days. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Sue and Theresa. I feel like the overarching story here is how hard we made you work for very short stints of time. But you know, the results have been, you know, so exciting to have this, you know, frame and it's painting back to, you know, sort of back together, and it's, you know, close to original presentation, to learn about these paintings. And there's a little bit of sort of archaeology that goes on here, where we're learning about what might have happened to them, and a leak here. And certainly with the frame, we could tell that somebody had, you know, sort of set it on its bottom for a long period of time. And so, you know, it's been such an important learning process for us. And I should say the first sort of, you know, full conservation project that we had done here at Holy Cross. So I appreciate, you know, Theresa and Sue's willingness to kind of join me as educators in this process. So I see questions coming in, and some of them are sort of more technical and less technical. I'm gonna, you know, anyone who wants to can use the raise hand function and just jump in and ask a question. And I'm just gonna ask one for Dora, because it was sort of back, but it's really to both of you, which is, how do you know when to stop yourself in removing the original paint? I think, Theresa, this came in when you were talking about the landscape painting. I mean, how do you know where to stop? How can you tell what is original and what is fill? And this question asks, has there ever been a painting where you really couldn't transform or, you know, couldn't get the painting into a state that made sense in the after?
The answer to the latter is no. We've never found a painting that couldn't conform to something. But the overpaint is generally a different texture and different solubility than the original. Sometimes when they were overpainted with oil in past restoration treatments, they do, as they age, become very close in solubility. Sometimes there'll be a varnish layer between the original and the overpaint, which is ideal, and that's what we do. We always apply an isolating varnish layer that separates the original painting from any in-painting we do to it. But generally, we with the use of a microscope, we can determine whether or not something was original to the work. If you get a crack going through the an area that's suspect, it may indicate that it was original, as opposed to if it flows over a crack or is inside the crack, that leads one to believe that it's a later addition. So did I touch on all the questions?
Yeah, a lot of archaeology, right? Of really sort of understanding the layers and seeing.
Yeah. Yes. Yesterday we were actually asked about something else, but they asked if we could remove a signature that was suspect. But we looked under the microscope and found that, you know, it was very consistent with the original paint, and, you know, the crack broke through the signature as well. So there was nothing indicating that the signature wasn't original. But you have to go through, and we looked with an ultraviolet light, which is sometimes a good source. So there are ways to try to determine whether or not an area is original or whether it's been added. And if there's any question, obviously you would not remove paint, you know, but usually there's a different solubility as well.
Yeah, I found it interesting, Geraldine, when you said that the the cracks had dirt in them, right? Which is something I hadn't really thought of, is that sort of mark of age, where you can actually start to tell when how the cracks line up with the history of the painting just by the dirt surface and its relationship to the cracks. So I hadn't known that you had to clean every single crack of its dirt. Some
Otherwise they
seriously
still show and you need to in-paint them.
labor intensive, amazing work. Kiara, I know you had some questions and maybe you want to just throw them out and unmute yourself, because I think you can choose which ones you want to ask after you've heard the rest of the presentation.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, first of all, for all of this. This is just so wonderful. I was in the class of 94 in the art history department, so yay. But and now I'm a conservator as well. So this is just extraordinary. I've been waiting for something like this. So thank you, everybody. Let's see, I don't remember what I asked. And to what I think there's one painting, I forget, I think it was the Magdalene, where you had, you said that there was some pentimento. And so, you know, because of the movement of her face. And I was wondering if you did any sort of imaging through IR, infrared, to see if the drawing underneath was different than how it came out in the paint layer.
We did not. We don't have, unfortunately, the technology here to do that.
Yeah.
We left it, you know, where it's disturbing. We sometimes just blend it a little bit, but in this case, we blended in the face, but the rest is still there. So it's still part of the history of the painting. It is still visible as pentimenti, but no, we did not do any.
Okay.
So sometimes in that case, we would do an X-ray that can discern the different layers. In this case, it wasn't questionable. It wasn't something that had been in-painted. It was certainly just an area of texture when you looked at the piece. So you could clearly tell that something had been changed. Either it was painted over another painting, or just an adjustment that the artist made during the execution of the painting. But you know, when there are time constraints too, sometimes those things can't be done. We always look at it with the UV light and the microscope.
Yep. Yeah.
I think there's more to that painting to be discovered. I mean, there's a lot of pentimenti actually, you know, in different parts of the painting. So I think there's probably more to think about. And you know, one of the comments that we received is about the addition of the book, and that's, you know, a fascinating history to the painting.
That was fantastic. Fantastic find. You know, the cross underneath that was, would have been really, really cool to see.
Well, and sometimes we understand why they want to add or change some, you know, part of the composition. But in this case, the rock was perfectly fine underneath, was not abraded, or
I know.
Not quite sure why the book was added. But
I think that we're gonna have to think more about that, because it's a very specific choice. And you know, Virginia Regan, who is a scholar here in the art history department, has just retired, as saying, you know, the addition to sort of lessen the Catholic implications of the painting might be a reason you would paint over.
Oh, yeah.
It might also be about the halo might play into that as well. So I think we have more to discover about that Magdalen painting. But you know, again, like it seemed like it would be an interesting painting to clean. So I'm glad that we started it on its journey towards discovery. That's how I feel like. I feel like we have opened up the doorway for the Magdalen to be explored more. So I just want to invite anyone else to ask questions. We're well over time. We're about 10 minutes over time. And we are so grateful to Theresa and Geraldine and Sue to coming here and talking about their work. Of course, we're grateful for the work that they've done, but that they've added on top of it a discussion of what they did is important, for Holy Cross, for as an educational community, to understand a little bit more about the effects and advantages to conservation work. So thank you to both of you for partnering with us. And I'm going to answer this last question that just came in, which is, what are the barriers standing between restoring the rest of the 25 paintings? And Benjamin, there are more than 25 paintings. Those were just the ones that we pulled out of storage. A lot of reasons we were a little bit random about what we pulled out of storage, but also we are a small staff, and so we were only pulling things really that we could lift. There are a few paintings we just can't even pick up. And the barrier is financial. We have no care budget, no conservation care budget. And the only reason we had any budget to do this is because we had extra money because of the pandemic, and we had reduced programming for a year. So that is the reality. And part of the goal here is some resource building and the education to the campus of what stewardship means, how one cares for a collection. Part of the examination of collections is to understand how to take care of what we already have, and then to think about how we build to the future. So we're hoping that it's a continued conversation, and hoping that these 5 paintings are impactful and feel like we have a lot more to do. So Theresa and Sue are helpful in thinking about, how that priority list can work against, the mission of the college and the mission of the Cantor. So we're really, this is an ongoing, this is sort of putting a pin in this moment, and, hoping that we have ongoing projects with Sue and Theresa and Geraldine and, others as well. So thank you all for coming today. You're welcome to reach out. I know that we will hopefully see Sue and Theresa and Geraldine again. And I think, if they can both say this, but they probably would welcome any other questions that you had. If you wanted to reach out, you can always reach out to me, and I can put you in contact. Yes, Sue, Theresa?
Sure,
Yeah.
Send the questions along, send the information along. Happy to connect people.
Great.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.